Most people can feel a little jealous at times, but it's never an excuse to kill. A casual affair becomes a lethal obsession.
This was the man she wanted. She would do anything to have them.
A preacher's daughter walks on the wild side.
Bullets and guns must have aroused her.
You got a hot date? Who is he?
And a jilted lover won't let her ex move on.
If I can't have you, nobody will.
In 2012, in her hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, 37-year-old party girl Shauna Liz Golyar is always up for a good time.
Liz liked men. Oh, did she? Liz was girls went wild, all in one person.
I've been single a while.
Well, I just broke up with my ex, so I'm not looking for anything serious.
My perfect man.
Liz's no-strings mantra appeals to new hookup, 35-year-old single dad, Dave.
All he wanted to do was to casually date. She said she wanted no entanglements. It sounded like a dream come true for Dave.
They were both okay with, yep, we're having fun. I'm gonna talk to other guys, I'll talk to other girls, or at least appeared that way on the surface at first.
But it's not long before this modern arrangement turns old school.
I gotta go.
How about we go away for the weekend?
Oh, can't do. I got a date Saturday night.
Party girl Liz starts wanting more.
Your loss.
Yeah, it changes when she meets Dave. Something about him she really liked, and she wanted them to be in a committed relationship.
Come on, don't be like this. I'll call you.
She may have been a serial dater before, but now she only had eyes for one man.
But Dave doesn't get the memo. He's still playing the field.
Carrie.
Dave.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm well. Oh.
He strikes up another relationship with 37-year-old Carrie Farver.
It wasn't long before Liz became obsessed with conquering Dave. And she would stalk any woman he was seeing. His phone starts blowing up. Guess who? Text messages, phone calls, one after another from Liz.
Just answer it. They're not going away.
Hey, I can't talk right now.
Stop ignoring me. I need you to meet me at your place right now.
Can't do.
You have to.
You have to right now.
Okay, 30 minutes. I'm sorry. I have to meet a friend at my place.
Dave manages to calm Liz, at least for the moment. But her distractions don't stop Dave from following up with can quite pan out in practice. This time, it's Dave's turn to fall in love.
You know, people may say, I don't want involvement, but it happens, and it seems to... Liz created a fake profile and tried to friend Carrie online.
Hello?
This was the man she wanted. She would do anything to have them.
For new lovers Dave and Carrie, today is like any other day.
What time will I see you tonight?
Not sure. Probably late, so don't worry.
Tuesday morning, Dave leaves for work about 6:20 in the morning. Carrie was up on her laptop. She was doing some work stuff, some emails.
But as quickly as their relationship starts, it ends.
It seemed like Carrie went over the deep end. She started sending text messages to her mother, to Dave, even to her work. She sent one to Dave telling him that the relationship was over.
We're done. I'm breaking up with you. I hate you. Never talk to me again. It was just like a 180-degree change, like just a different person.
Carrie's change of heart stuns everyone.
She took another job in, I think, Kansas City. She quits her job abruptly.
Adding to the insult, Dave's part-time girlfriend, Liz, is being harassed too.
I'm terrified. She's been stalking me. And now this.
Carrie was out there causing all kinds of trouble.
Liz, are you okay?
Oh, thank you.
But there's an upside for Liz.
Liz and Dave were both victims of Carrie harassing or damaging their property or stalking them. It brought them together.
Sir, do you know this Carrie woman?
I was seeing her. She's been harassing me.
It's a puzzle for the police.
No one could ever actually find Carrie and then complete an interview or talk to her about it because she just never resurfaced.
Thank you. Can you believe this?
I gotta go.
Why?
That's my ex. One of the kids is sick. I'm sorry.
Despite Carrie's self-destruction, Dave isn't running back to Liz's arms. Until a violent attack.
Liz had been shot.
The police searched by ground, by air, trying to find where this shooter went.
I've been shot. I'm bleeding.
And that's when Liz's story started falling apart.
3443 West Monroe.
Did you see the shooter?
I'm not sure. I think it was a woman. My boyfriend's ex.
Suspicious police start investigating the victim.
We used that shooting as a ploy to, I was helping her with harassment in the shooting. We had a GPS tracker on our car for about 3 months. We requested consent to download her phone.
Amongst her communications is a trail of threatening correspondence.
Claiming to be responsible for the shooting and pretending to be Carrie. And like, don't make me do what I did to Carrie to you.
Records show Liz isn't just the recipient.
Well, what do you know?
She's also the sender. Liz has been impersonating 2 different women, spinning a web of lies to get Dave back and to cover up murder.
And finally, she put the crosshairs on herself.
So Liz is having these email exchanges, and really what she's doing is confessing to what she did to Carrie.
Now, Carrie Farver's strange behavior years earlier can be explained. On November 13th, 2012, Liz paid her a visit.
The fact that Carrie was in Dave's life was more than Liz could handle. Carrie had to go.
Shut up! Move it! I need your phone! Give me the password! Password 975. Okay.
Carrie was probably terrified and thought, all right, she's crazy. I need to keep her from getting crazier, so I'm going to do what she says.
All right, move it. Move it!
It's the last time anyone sees Carrie for 4 years.
Liz ultimately was able to get Carrie into her own car in the passenger seat. She stabbed her 3 or 4 times in the stomach and the chest area. Was able to get her to a remote location. She claimed she burned her and covered her with a tarp, and then ultimately dismembered her body and put it into trash bags. And then to some trash somewhere is where she alleged that the body was dumped.
Carrie's body is never found. But the police uncovered deleted photos from Liz's camera.
Gotcha.
The deleted ones that had a picture of it looked like a post-mortem foot with a Chinese tattoo, it meant mother. And then we had a pathologist and another expert testify that it was Carrie's tattoo.
Liz was proud of killing Carrie.
Poor Carrie did nothing to Liz. She just had a relationship with someone who Liz on her own marked as exclusive.
In cyberspace, Liz became Carrie, breaking up with the world.
In today's world, you can send a message and say you're quitting your job, breaking up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and it's kind of accepted in a way.
Then, to get Dave back, Liz made her victim her victimizer.
Liz was obsessed with making herself look like a valuable person to Dave and a victim of the evil Carrie.
If you're willing to shoot yourself in the leg and just miss your femoral artery for something, you're very dedicated.
Liz deserves an award for the most manipulative liar in the world.
In 2017, Shauna Liz Golyar is found guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree arson. She receives life for the murder and an additional 18 to 20 years for arson.
Jealousy is a normal emotion in pretty much all animals. In Liz's case, it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Just come. Hey,
They argued about it for 2 days. Her heart was breaking. And that was very unfortunate.
Want to order a drink?
She was raised to be a good, upstanding wife. She wasn't married too long before she kind of decided married life wasn't for her.
Well, I can't serve no lady.
I assure you, I'm no lady.
All she had to look forward to in her mind was meal planning and babies.
All right, then what are you having?
What do you recommend?
I'll say, how about some of the good stuff?
33-year-old Frank Broadway Jones is just the kind of adventure Marie is looking for.
Marie hooked up with the last person in the world her family would have approved of, a bartender.
Frank Broadway Jones was described as a dashing divorcee, so he had a marriage behind him as well.
Do you dance?
Do now.
the lovers skip town and move to the action of Salt Lake City. But the stars in their eyes soon turn to black holes.
So you sure you got no work for me at all?
Nothing.
Frank's a fantastic lover,
All right. Thanks anyway.
but not a great provider.
Says you got no work for another week.
You won't be able to pay the rent.
Nope. That is all we got.
Oh, Johnny, I'll have my regular.
Maybe it's time I made some money.
Marie's not one to let fate drive her fortune.
Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for some work.
Oh, what kind of work?
Well, the kind that you do.
Oh, the kind of work I do.
Yes, how do I get started?
Oh, well, I can tell you all about that.
It wasn't long before Marie realized she couldn't count on Frank to bring home the bacon. So Marie decides to get a job on her own, and she gets a pretty high-paying one.
There's limited ways for a woman to earn money in the early 1900s.
Here's my girl.
Hi, how are you doing? Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Aside from the world's oldest profession.
There's a lot of mining communities around Salt Lake.
No money, no kiss.
There's only one thing a young woman does in a mining community if she's not married to one of the miners, and it's servicing the miners.
She did what she felt she needed to do. And, you know, and she was breadwinner, really.
But there's one man she's not making happy.
What do you think? Too much?
For a prostitute? No such thing.
Frank isn't wild about the woman in his life, his significant other, doing that, but he doesn't have to see it because she's doing it out of town. It's not in his face.
Now you know that this is strictly business. My heart belongs to you.
But everything else is for sale.
Oh.
The couple comes to an uneasy understanding as Marie takes to her new career.
Oh, that last one was so fat. I thought he was gonna squash me.
She's able to kind of have her cake and eat it too, right? She has this steady relationship with a dashing guy and also gets to have fun in mining towns and make probably a lot more money than Frank was making.
Gossip starts spreading around town.
What's wrong?
He was with another woman.
What woman?
Maria is very upset when she finds out that Frank's being unfaithful.
I saw them on the other side of the street, and then they walked up to each other and they kissed. It looked like they were together.
Let me explain.
Explain what? That you're a two-timing louse?
Well, it's not like you haven't been sleeping around.
Oh, how dare you!
Whoa, just calm. Hey, just calm down. Calm down.
He was like, well, wait a minute. I'm doing what you're doing, only on a much smaller scale. But that wasn't the point for her, not even close.
Hey, calm down. Look, I'm sorry.
There is a difference. Frank was in love, and that was very unfortunate.
It's 1914 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Frank and Marie are rekindling their relationship. after Frank's affair with Mae Dunbar. Until a chance encounter.
They were out at dinner. They were out at a restaurant. And who should be there but Mae? Frank acknowledged her just with, with the barest of nods. Would have been rude to do it. Very unfortunate.
Marie, please. No, don't!
She shoots him twice. Once in the leg, and the other time kind of in the side or back, but that bullet nicked his heart, and that's what caused him to die almost instantaneously.
When she saw what she had done and it hit her, she turned the gun on herself and pulled the trigger. She tried to kill herself. That is grief.
I think I killed him.
The hotel desk clerk by this time's heard 3 shots. He's up the stairs to find out what's going on.
What did you do? Wait, stop!
There was a serious attempt she made on her life. That was not a cry for help. She meant to kill herself.
Marie can't live with what she's done.
I didn't mean to kill him.
But she has to.
She should, by all rights, have died right there on the spot, and she didn't.
Now she must face justice.
She originally pleads not guilty to first-degree murder. Eventually, it's pled down, and she pleads guilty to involuntary manslaughter.
The fact that Marie tried to kill herself, and it was a very serious attempt, weighed heavily on the judge.
Customs of the time often see female killers granted leniency, not afforded men. Marie Arthur receives just 1 year in prison, convicted of involuntary manslaughter. She's on parole after 4 months.
She was out and free to conduct her life again, however she wanted.
Marie lives to 61, dying of natural causes in 1948.
These days, if a woman did that, 25 to life. There's no mitigating circumstances.
Marie's career choice proved fatal. Not for her, but for the man she loved.
I think the fact that Marie tried to kill herself, this act alone made her a sympathetic figure in the eyes of anyone that had ever been in love. I can't imagine how horrible it must have been. The sparks were really flying.
You can't tell me what to do.
It was the beginning of the end.
For some, I love you is best expressed in ink.
You okay? It doesn't hurt as much as I thought. Maybe we should just forget the whole idea. It's too late now.
In 1990, Hartford, Connecticut, Gloria Rivera and Lucy Cruz are head over heels.
Tattooing in the 1990s wasn't popular like it was today. So it was a big step. Gloria was so proud of her lover.
Thanks.
The sun rose and the sun set on Gloria for Lucy.
But as their relationship blossoms, so do their differences.
Ow! Oh, dang. That sore. Get used to it, babe. Love hurts.
Lucy was much more mature, and she knew who she was.
You know tattoos are forever, right? They have laser removal these days.
Gloria, on the other hand, were young mothers.
Women her age, most were married, having kids, staying at home while the husbands worked.
The once inseparable couple are slipping apart.
Gloria developed other interests, started staying out till 3 in the morning.
Did you have a good night with him? What the hell? Why are you sitting in the dark? Waiting for you?
There's only one reason a person who is part of a partnership stays out till 2, 3, 4 in the morning with other people. They're cheating.
It's 3 a.m. Where have you been? I'm going to bed. I'm tired. From now on, you get home by midnight.
I think Gloria was seeing men. Lucy was probably well aware of it. And then it got to be too much for Lucy.
You can't tell me what to do. Who do you think you are? You can't just come in here at any hour.
Gloria might have been bisexual.
After 3 years, Gloria ends it.
One day, Gloria just...
When Gloria moves out, she doesn't go far, staying in the same apartment block.
It's okay, Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
She moved in with some other people, but it was still in the same building as Lucy. And Lucy had a very broken heart.
Can't we just work this out? There's nothing to work out. I want something that you can't give me.
Lucy didn't have that much support. She had a few people. Gloria had a lot. I'm sure that was very difficult for Lucy, who tried to keep her life together.
We can adopt, or there's IVF, there's other options. It's over, Lucy, please. Just leave me alone.
You're making a fool of yourself.
At first, Lucy tried to win Gloria back, to convince her that everything would be all right. But it wasn't successful. It destroyed Lucy emotionally.
When her former lover doesn't return to her arms, Lucy starts to lose control.
Eventually, Lucy started to get angry.
I think it was building and building and building.
She snapped.
Gloria!
She had a razor blade. And she told Gloria, she said, listen.
Come with me, I want to talk to you.
There's nothing to say. Look, I'm running late.
You got a hot date? Who is he? Listen to me. If I can't have you, so help me, nobody will. If you get pregnant, I'm gonna cut that baby right out of you.
I will kill you, and I will kill any man you're with.
Then I'm gonna kill you.
I mean, this is jealousy at its worst.
That should have resulted in a psychiatric hospitalization.
Just get away from me. Don't come near me ever again.
Lucy Cruz can't accept her love affair with Gloria Rivera is over. All she has left is a necklace and anger.
Jealousy can be a very violent emotion for some. And here we see it really at its breaking point. Lucy just could not picture Gloria with anybody else but her. And this really drove her to a point of no return.
On September 3rd, 1993, Lucy plans to make things right.
You know, you don't put a weapon in your pocket and head out the door to confront somebody unless you plan on using it. And on this night, Lucy makes good on her promise.
Hey, Jose, any of you guys seen Gloria?
Just leave her be, Lucy.
I thought she might like this.
This was motivated by the need for Lucy to punish Gloria for leaving her.
Oh, come on, Lucy. Oh, she doesn't turn up. I guess I'll just have to smash it.
Lucy wants everyone to know. She makes a public declaration.
Lucy had Gloria's necklace that Gloria had made for her.
Or toss it down the sewer.
Please, don't do that. Why? It's what you did to me.
And she broke it.
I guess symbolism, breaking the relationship. It was symbolic that this was it.
She was done with Gloria, all right, for the rest of her life.
Lucy ends the relationship on her terms.
Lucy steps back, whips out her handgun in front of all these people, fires right at Gloria.
I think it was 2. Right to the torso. And it was a small caliber gun, so it was close range. And that was it.
In front of all these witnesses, there's absolutely no possible way she could have ever gotten away with this. It makes you wonder what she's thinking. Is that gonna take away the pain I'm feeling about losing her?
I think Lucy's last words to Gloria were very telling. That'll teach you. She forgot to add the words, to leave me.
Lucy goes on the run.
Lucy! What have you done?
Came to me, they retained me. I said she's got to surrender, which is the only advice I can give, and she did.
Hi there. Can I help you, ma'am?
I think so.
But it will only be a confession of sorts.
I'm Lucy Cruz. Apparently, I murdered my ex-girlfriend.
Lucy claims not to know what she has done.
Sometimes in crimes of passion, and that may have happened here, the idea of killing someone that they once loved becomes impossible to deal with, and the memory is repressed.
And then you produced the handgun and you shot Gloria in the chest.
I believe her, and the doctor believed her.
If you say so.
She was in a fugue state. She was just blank. Doctors have told me that it's a complete break, a psychotic break.
You really don't remember shooting down your ex-lover in cold blood?
I told you. First I knew of it is when I saw it on TV the next day.
She was another person at that moment. In other words, she didn't know that she was the killer until she saw it on TV.
But there is one thing Lucy can't argue in her defense. The last words to her victim.
That'll teach you. That to me says, right there, she knew exactly what she was doing. If I can't have you, nobody will.
Showing anger and hostility and vengeance, which the judge didn't appreciate. I think he referenced it in his sentencing. It didn't help.
In 1994, Lucy Cruz is convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. 23 years later, she is released on parole in 2017.
They say that love and hate are closely related. That if you love someone and then you hate them because they made you angry or left you, you're probably still in love with them.
These deadly women couldn't accept they lost at love. Liz Golyar stole her rival's life.
It begins with a sound no one in that town ever forgot. A sound that didn't come from a scream or a gunshot, but from silence. The kind of silence that arrives when something is wrong before anyone knows what it is. When a street that should be alive at dawn stays unnaturally still. When a front door remains closed long past the hour it should have opened. And in the spring of 1985, in a quiet Ohio town where everybody recognized everybody else's car, that silence crept in like a warning no one knew how to read, because by the time they did, it was already too late, and what followed would harden into a cold case that refused to die. A mystery that would linger for decades, whispering through courtrooms, kitchens, and police archives, waiting for a moment when the past would reach forward and grab the present by the throat. The house sat on a short street lined with maples, modest, unremarkable. The kind of place you passed every day without ever looking twice, and yet on that morning something felt off. Neighbors later said they could feel it in their chests, an unease that didn't have words yet. The newspaper still rolled in the driveway, untouched, the porch light still on though the sun was already climbing, and when the door was finally opened, when someone stepped inside and realized what wasn't there. Instead of what was, the town's heartbeat skipped, because a person had vanished without a trace. Not a runaway, not a break-in, not a clear crime scene, just absence, sharp and sudden, like a photograph where the subject has been cut cleanly out. Police arrived fast, local officers first, then county, their radios crackling with confusion rather than certainty, because there was no blood, no overturned furniture, no sign of struggle that fit neatly into a report, just a kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, a coat still hanging where it belonged, keys on the hook by the door, a life paused mid-sentence, and from the very first hour the word began to spread quietly, then louder, then everywhere, cold case, because when you have nothing to hold on to, no timeline, no suspect, no motive, the future of the investigation starts collapsing even as it begins. The missing person was known here, not famous, not powerful, just familiar. The kind of familiarity that makes a disappearance feel personal to people who barely spoke to you. And that familiarity turned into fear as days passed and search parties moved through woods and along rivers. Boots sinking into mud, voices calling a name that echoed back unanswered, helicopters slicing the sky, dogs tracking scents that led nowhere, and each night the same question circled back through living rooms and late-night news broadcasts. How does someone vanish in a town this small? In a year when people still watched each other's houses, when strangers stood out, when secrets were supposed to be harder to keep. Detectives began to pull at threads, interviews stacking up, notebooks filling with half-answers and contradictions, co-workers, neighbors, family members, everyone certain of what they knew. No one able to explain what mattered, timelines that almost lined up but didn't, sightings that fell apart under scrutiny, rumors that burned hot and fast before collapsing into ash, and all the while the pressure built, because the longer a case goes without answers, the more the community turns inward, suspicion leaking into everyday interactions, glances lingering too long, doors locking earlier at night, the sense that whoever did this, whatever happened, might not be gone, might still be close enough to hear the sirens. Evidence, if it could be called that, came in fragments, a strange phone call reported too late to trace, a car seen parked where it didn't belong, then seen again somewhere else by someone else, details that refused to settle into a clear picture, and investigators felt it slipping, felt that familiar dread every detective knows, the moment when a case begins to cool, when leads stop leading anywhere at all, when files grow thicker but truth stays thin, and by the end of that first year, the words were spoken openly. The case had gone cold. Another cold case joining a long list of unanswered questions buried in metal cabinets and memory. But cold didn't mean forgotten, not here. Not in Ohio in 1985 where the disappearance had marked time itself. People remembered exactly where they were when they heard the news, remembered the searchlights cutting through fog, remembered the way the town felt smaller afterward, tighter, like it was holding its breath, and anniversaries became rituals of grief and frustration. Candles lit, statements reissued, tips called in by voices trembling with hope that maybe this time, this memory, this detail would be the one that broke everything open. Years passed, then more years, detectives retired. New ones took their place. Each generation reopening the file with the same optimism and the same sinking realization. Photographs yellowed. Cassette tapes degraded. Evidence standards changed. Science moved on while the case remained frozen in its era. And yet the name stayed alive, spoken in hushed tones, written in bold type whenever the paper needed to remind readers of the town's unfinished business. A cold case that refused to be buried, no matter how much time tried to cover it over. Then, decades later, something shifted, not loudly at first, not with sirens or press conferences, but with a quiet movement inside an evidence room, a box pulled from a shelf, a piece of material that had once seemed insignificant now re-examined through the lens of modern technology. And suddenly the past wasn't as distant as it had felt, because new evidence has a way of collapsing time, of making 1985 feel uncomfortably close. And when word began to leak that there had been a breakthrough, that the cold case might not be as cold as everyone believed, the town felt that old tensions snapped back into place, fear and hope twisting together, because answers, when they finally come, rarely arrive gently. People who thought they'd moved on found themselves unable to sleep, old rumors resurfaced, names whispered again, and the question that had haunted Ohio since 1985 rose back to the surface, sharper than ever: what really happened, who had known more than they said, and whether the truth, once uncovered, would heal the town or tear it open all over again, because some cold cases stay buried for a reason, and when new evidence shocks an entire town, it doesn't just change the future, it rewrites the past. The investigation did not slow down because detectives wanted it to. It slowed because reality forced it to, because every door they knocked on eventually led back to the same hollow answers. Every timeline circled itself like a snake biting its own tail, and inside the station the case file began to feel heavier, not from evidence but from expectation, because Ohio in 1985 was not supposed to produce mysteries like this, not disappearances that left no fingerprints, no witnesses brave enough, or clear enough to stand behind their words, just a growing sense that something had gone wrong in plain sight and no one could say exactly when. Officers replayed the last confirmed hours again and again, rewinding lives as if they were tapes, isolating moments that felt normal at the time but now pulsed with danger. A stop at a local store, a conversation that ended too casually, a routine drive down roads that suddenly felt like corridors leading nowhere, and the more they stared, the less certain they became, because nothing in those final movements screamed crime, and yet crime was the only explanation that fit the void left behind. Neighbors became witnesses without knowing it, their memories stretched thin by stress and guilt, people wondering if they should have noticed something, if a sound in the night had been more than wind, if a car idling too long had meant something darker, and interviews blurred together as detectives tried to separate fact from imagination, because time had already begun to warp the truth. One person remembered headlights at an odd hour, another swore they heard arguing, another insisted the street had been quiet as a grave, and none of it aligned cleanly, each account like a shard from a broken mirror, reflecting fragments but never the whole picture, and the word cold case crept closer, hovering over the desks like a sentence waiting to be passed. The town reacted the way small towns always do under pressure, with unity on the surface and suspicion underneath. Casseroles delivered alongside whispered accusations. Prayer vigils held while rumors spread in parking lots, and every unfamiliar face suddenly felt threatening, every familiar one capable of secrets. Businesses closed earlier, porch lights stayed on longer, parents held their children tighter, and the disappearance became a reference point, a before and after that defined daily life, because when someone vanishes without explanation, safety itself feels like a lie people tell themselves to sleep at night. Detectives expanded their search outward, mapping every possible route, every place where someone could disappear unseen, abandoned barns, industrial sites, stretches of highway that cut through nothingness. But Ohio offered too much space and too many hiding places, and the absence of evidence became evidence in itself, suggesting planning, suggesting knowledge of the area, suggesting that whoever was responsible understood how to move through this landscape without leaving a trail. Theories formed and collapsed, some pointing inward, others outward, strangers passing through, acquaintances hiding in plain sight, and each theory carried its own consequences, because accusing the wrong person in a town like this could destroy lives as thoroughly as the crime itself. As months turned into a year, the case shifted from urgency to endurance. A slow burn instead of a fire, detectives assigned and reassigned, each promising to see what others had missed, each eventually confronting the same wall, and families lived suspended between hope and mourning, unable to grieve without a body, unable to move on without answers, trapped in a limbo that stretched endlessly forward. Media attention faded, replaced by newer tragedies elsewhere, but locally the story never disappeared, resurfacing whenever someone thought they had remembered something new, whenever a tip came in that felt different enough to chase, and every time the phone rang at the station late at night, officers felt that familiar jolt, the irrational certainty that this might finally be it. Years accumulated quietly, stacking on top of one another until the case itself felt like a relic, bound in aging folders, its photographs dated by hairstyles and clothing, its audio interviews crackling with the imperfections of old tape, and yet the weight of it never diminished, because unresolved cases have gravity. They pull at everyone who comes near them, bending careers, shaping reputations, haunting conversations. New detectives read the file like a cautionary tale, learning the geography of failure as much as the geography of the town, seeing where momentum was lost, where assumptions might have closed doors too early, and wondering whether the truth had slipped past everyone in those chaotic early days. Then technology began to change the rules, quietly at first, then unmistakably, DNA databases expanding, forensic techniques sharpening, old evidence reinterpreted through new science, and suddenly cold cases across the country were waking up, solved by details once considered useless, fibers too small to matter, samples too degraded to test, and in Ohio the possibility lingered like a dare, because if other cases could be revived, why not this one? Investigators revisited the evidence room, pulling boxes that hadn't been opened in years, handling items with a mix of reverence and desperation, hoping that something overlooked would finally speak. It was during one of these reviews that attention returned to a piece of evidence long dismissed as inconclusive, something logged, tagged, then shelved when it failed to produce immediate answers, and now, under different lights and different expectations, it began to look less like a dead end and more like a question mark. The decision to re-examine it wasn't dramatic, no announcement, no sense of destiny, just a methodical choice driven by frustration and the knowledge that time, once an enemy, could now be an ally because age had changed the tools available to investigators. When the results came back, they didn't arrive with certainty, just with possibility, a partial answer that hinted at connections never before considered, and that hint was enough to reopen wounds the town thought had scarred over. Word spread fast, faster than officials wanted, because secrets in small towns rarely stay secret, and suddenly people were talking again, old names resurfacing, old relationships reevaluated, memories re-examined under the harsh light of suspicion. The cold case, dormant for years, was breathing again, and with each breath it pulled the past closer, forcing everyone to confront the idea that the truth might have been walking beside them all along. Fear returned alongside hope because breakthroughs don't just promise closure, they threaten exposure, they suggest that someone, somewhere, has something to lose, and as investigators followed this new thread, they felt the tension rising, not just in the community but within themselves, aware that solving a decades-old case means rewriting history, challenging assumptions, and possibly revealing that justice had been delayed not by fate, but by human error. The question was no longer whether the case could be solved, but whether the town was ready for what the answer might reveal, because cold cases, once warmed, can burn just as fiercely as fresh ones, and the shock promised by new evidence was only beginning to ripple outward. And as Ohio waited, holding its collective breath once more, the line between past and present blurred, 1985 bleeding into the now, reminding everyone that time does not erase secrets, it only hides them, and when they surface, they do so with force, dragging everything they touch into the light, ready or not. The new evidence did not arrive like a verdict, it arrived like a shadow, stretching across interviews that had once felt settled, touching names that had faded into background noise, and forcing investigators to confront a truth they rarely say out loud, that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones made early, when pressure is highest and information is thinnest. In 1985, the investigation had followed the logic of the moment, chasing what seemed urgent, discarding what felt incidental, and now, decades later, that logic was being challenged by science that didn't care about instinct or reputation, only about patterns, and those patterns were beginning to suggest that something crucial had been overlooked. The cold case was no longer just an old mystery. It was an active presence, pressing down on desks, on conversations, on the quiet routines of a town that had learned to live with unanswered questions. Detectives began retracing steps not as they remembered them, but as they actually were, reconstructing timelines minute by minute, questioning the certainty of statements once taken as fact, and the deeper they went, the more fragile those certainties appeared. A witness who had been cleared early suddenly looked less solid, not because they had lied, but because memory itself is unreliable, bending to fear, to suggestion, to the simple passage of time. Another person, once considered irrelevant, now fit uncomfortably well into gaps no one had known how to fill, and the case shifted from a straight line into a web, connections forming where none had been seen before. The community sensed the change even before it was acknowledged publicly, because tension has a way of leaking through official silence, and people began watching each other again, not with the raw panic of 1985, but with a colder, more calculating awareness. Conversations stalled when certain names were mentioned, eyes darted away too quickly, and old friendships felt strained by questions no one wanted to ask directly. The idea that the truth might implicate someone familiar was more unsettling than the idea of an unknown predator, because it suggested that danger had worn a friendly face, had shared meals, had stood shoulder to shoulder at town events while the case cooled around it. Investigators followed the new thread carefully, aware that every move could send shockwaves through lives that had been built on the assumption of closure, and they re-interviewed witnesses with a different tone, less accusatory, more precise, asking not what people believed, but what they could prove. Old alibis were revisited, some dissolving under scrutiny, others reinforced, and in the process, the story of that day in 1985 began to fracture, revealing inconsistencies that no one had noticed or wanted to see at the time. The cold case was teaching them something uncomfortable, that urgency can blur vision, that early narratives can harden into obstacles, and that the truth often waits patiently for the right conditions to emerge. One particular detail, insignificant for years, now stood out with startling clarity. A small action, a brief interaction, logged but never pursued because it didn't fit the dominant theory. In the context of new evidence, it took on weight, suggesting opportunity, proximity, and motive in a way that forced investigators to reconsider the entire framework of the case. This was the moment when hope sharpened into determination, when the possibility of resolution stopped being abstract and started to feel tangible, and with that shift came risk, because reopening wounds means inviting backlash, skepticism, and the fear of being wrong all over again. The media caught wind of the renewed activity, their headlines cautious but electric, phrases like "cold case revisited" and "new forensic review" appearing in print and on late-night broadcasts, reigniting public interest that had smoldered quietly for decades. Families who had lived in suspended grief felt the familiar surge of emotion, hope battling exhaustion, because they had seen false dawns before, had learned to protect themselves from disappointment, and yet this time felt different, heavier, more real. The weight of expectation pressed down on investigators, because they knew that reopening a cold case isn't just about solving a crime, it's about managing the collective memory of a community that has been shaped by its absence. As interviews continued, subtle changes in behavior caught attention, hesitation where confidence once stood, defensiveness where calm had been expected, and none of it was enough on its own, but together it painted a picture of unease that couldn't be ignored. Detectives documented everything, aware that decades-old cases are fragile, vulnerable to doubt, to legal challenges, to the accusation that time itself has contaminated the truth. They moved slowly, deliberately, building a foundation that could withstand scrutiny, because solving the case meant more than identifying what happened. It meant proving it beyond the reach of nostalgia and speculation. The new evidence also forced a reevaluation of motive, shifting focus from random violence to something more personal, more intimate, and that realization sent a chill through the investigation, because personal motives are often hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary conflicts, quiet resentments, moments of anger dismissed as harmless. Investigators began mapping relationships, tracing lines of connection that extended deeper than anyone had previously explored, and with each line drawn, the past grew more complex, less tidy, revealing that the town's history was layered with tensions no one had wanted to confront. At the same time, doubts crept in, because cold cases are notorious for false hope, for coincidences that look meaningful until they collapse under pressure, and investigators question themselves relentlessly, checking and rechecking their work, aware that the desire for resolution can be as dangerous as apathy. They consulted outside experts, forensic specialists, legal advisors, building a network of scrutiny around the case, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past, determined to let evidence, not assumption, dictate the direction forward. The town watched, waiting for clarity that refused to arrive quickly, because truth rarely reveals itself all at once, especially after so many years. People revisited their own memories, wondering if they had misjudged someone, if they had ignored a warning sign, if their silence had contributed to the case's long dormancy, and that self-examination was perhaps the most unsettling development of all, because it suggested that the cold case was not just an unsolved crime, but a mirror held up to the community itself. As momentum built, so did the sense of inevitability, the feeling that the case was moving toward something irreversible, and investigators felt it too, the subtle shift from exploration to convergence, when disparate threads begin to pull toward a single point. They knew that once that point was reached, there would be no going back, no returning the case to its dormant state, and that whatever emerged would alter the town's understanding of itself forever. The cold case, long a symbol of mystery and loss, was becoming a catalyst, threatening to expose truths buried beneath decades of routine and denial. And in the quiet moments, late at night, as files lay open under fluorescent lights, detectives confronted the gravity of what they were doing, aware that solving the case would not erase the years of pain, would not restore what had been taken, but might finally give shape to an absence that had haunted Ohio since 1985. The question that lingered was no longer whether the truth existed, but whether it could be brought into the open without tearing the community apart, because some answers, once uncovered, demand a reckoning far deeper than anyone expects. By the time the investigation reached this stage, the cold case no longer felt like an artifact from 1985. It felt alive, reactive, as if it were pushing back against the hands trying to pull it apart, because every step forward triggered resistance somewhere else, a door closing, a memory retreating, a voice choosing silence over explanation. Detectives could feel it in interviews that ended too quickly, in phone calls that went unanswered, in the sudden appearance of lawyers where there had once been cooperation, and that shift told them more than any single piece of evidence ever could, because innocence tends to remain steady, while fear evolves. The town noticed too, even if it couldn't articulate why, sensing that something had crossed a line, that the cold case was no longer a story about the past, but a confrontation with the present. The new focus of the investigation narrowed the field, not dramatically, not with a public announcement, but through subtle reallocations of time and attention, certain names appearing more often in notes, certain addresses visited more frequently, patterns emerging not from one explosive revelation, but from repetition. A timeline once thought rigid began to flex, moments reinterpreted, gaps widened, and what had once been considered impossible now seemed merely inconvenient. Investigators reconstructed movements using every tool available, maps layered with data, phone records where they existed, witness accounts weighed against one another, and slowly, cautiously, a version of events took shape that felt disturbingly coherent. It was here that the cold case revealed its most unsettling quality, its ability to implicate not just individuals, but decisions, moments where a different choice might have changed everything. In 1985, leads had been prioritized based on urgency and probability, but now, with distance and perspective, those priorities looked different, and investigators saw how easily a critical detail could be dismissed when it didn't align with prevailing assumptions. That realization carried weight because it meant the case hadn't just gone cold by chance. It had cooled through a series of human judgments, each reasonable on its own, devastating in combination. As scrutiny intensified, contradictions became harder to ignore. Small inconsistencies that had once been chalked up to stress or poor memory now stood out sharply, especially when compared across multiple accounts. One person's timeline clashed subtly with another's, not enough to trigger alarms in 1985, but enough now to suggest that someone had been adjusting their story, refining it over time, sanding down rough edges to fit a narrative that had been accepted without challenge. Detectives didn't confront these discrepancies directly at first, choosing instead to let them accumulate, to see whether they formed a pattern, and that patience paid off because patterns once recognized are difficult to unsee. The emotional toll of this phase was heavy, particularly for those who had lived under the shadow of the disappearance for decades. Families felt the strain of renewed attention, old wounds reopened by questions they had answered 100 times before, each answer carrying the same pain, sharpened now by the possibility that resolution was close enough to touch. Hope was no longer abstract, it had texture, weight, and with that came fear, because hope can be broken, and many had learned the cost of believing too much too soon. Inside the investigation, pressure mounted, not just to find the truth, but to find it correctly, to ensure that when conclusions were drawn, They would withstand the scrutiny of courts, of public opinion, of history itself. Cold cases are unforgiving in this way, offering no margin for error, because any mistake can undo years of work, can turn a breakthrough into another chapter of disappointment. Detectives double-checked every inference, every assumption, aware that the story they were constructing would be challenged from every angle once it emerged from the shadows. The community's reaction grew more complex as whispers turned into conversations and conversations into quiet debates. Some people convinced the truth was finally coming, others wary, skeptical, protective of reputations built over decades. Loyalty clashed with logic, and the town's identity felt increasingly fragile, balanced between the desire for justice and the instinct to preserve harmony. The cold case had become a fault line, exposing tensions that had always been there but had never been forced into the open. At the center of this tension was the evidence itself, now re-examined, contextualized, cross-referenced in ways that had never been possible before. What once seemed isolated now appeared connected, not through coincidence, but through behavior, opportunity, and motive aligning with unsettling precision. Investigators felt the momentum shifting from inquiry to preparation, the subtle change in posture that comes when a case moves from asking what happened to determining how to prove it. Yet uncertainty remained, because even the strongest circumstantial cases can collapse without a single, undeniable anchor, and the search for that anchor consumed the investigation. Every overlooked item, every forgotten note, every degraded recording was scrutinized anew, and in that process, the past revealed both its clarity and its cruelty, because while some answers became sharper, others remained just out of reach, teasing, elusive, reminding everyone that time erodes not just evidence, but certainty. As days turned into weeks, the sense of inevitability grew heavier, the feeling that something was about to surface, whether the town was ready or not. Detectives spoke less about possibilities and more about consequences, about what would happen when the findings were made public, about the impact on lives that had grown around the assumption of unresolved mystery. They understood that solving the cold case would not be a clean victory, but a reckoning, one that would force the town to confront not only what had happened in 1985, but how it had lived with that absence for so long. And beneath all of it, like a low, constant hum, was the awareness that someone, somewhere, had carried this knowledge for decades, had lived alongside neighbors who mourned and wondered, had watched the case fade and now resurface, and that awareness infused every step with urgency. Because cold cases do not stay silent forever, and when they begin to speak, they do so in fragments, each one cutting deeper than the last, drawing closer to a truth that has waited far too long to be heard. The closer investigators moved toward clarity, the more the cold case seemed to resist, as if the truth itself were layered with defenses built over decades. Because time does not just hide facts. It gives people room to adapt to their secrets, to normalize them, to fold them into daily life until the extraordinary becomes routine. Detectives noticed it in the way certain conversations circled without landing, in the way answers were technically complete but emotionally empty, words chosen carefully, pauses measured, eyes scanning for reactions. This was not the confusion of innocence, it was the discipline of familiarity, the kind that comes from rehearsing a version of events until it feels natural, and that realization tightened the investigation's focus, sharpening instincts that had been dulled by years of uncertainty. They returned again to the physical world of 1985, not just maps and files, but the geography itself, walking routes that had once been dismissed as irrelevant, standing in places where sightlines intersected, where sound carried differently at night, where isolation could exist just steps away from familiarity. The town had changed, buildings replaced, roads widened, but some features remained stubbornly the same, and in those constants investigators found perspective, realizing how easily someone with local knowledge could move unseen, could anticipate routines, could exploit trust. The cold case began to feel less like a random rupture and more like the outcome of a convergence, opportunity meeting intent in a moment that had passed unnoticed by everyone else. This reframing altered the tone of interviews, pushing them into more uncomfortable territory, because questions were no longer abstract, no longer about memory alone, but about choices, about why someone had gone where they did, why they had spoken to whom they spoke to, why certain details had been emphasized while others were minimized. Some interviewees reacted with irritation, others with visible anxiety, and a few with a calm that felt rehearsed, a steadiness that did not waver even when confronted with contradictions. Detectives documented these reactions meticulously, aware that demeanor, while not proof, can illuminate pressure points, can reveal where a narrative begins to strain. At the same time, the investigation drew closer to the legal threshold, the line between inquiry and accusation, and crossing that line required precision, restraint, and patience. Cold cases are uniquely vulnerable here because defense strategies thrive on time, on faded memories, on lost evidence, and investigators knew that any misstep could give doubt the foothold it needed to undermine years of work. They consulted prosecutors early, testing theories against legal standards, anticipating challenges, asking not just whether a conclusion felt right, but whether it could survive in a courtroom where every assumption would be dissected. The emotional stakes escalated alongside the procedural ones, because families, long accustomed to silence, began to feel the pull of imminent answers, and that pull came with conflicting desires, the need for truth colliding with the fear of confirmation. Some family members spoke openly about their exhaustion, about the toll of decades spent suspended between hope and grief, while others retreated, unwilling to engage until something definitive emerged. Their reactions served as a reminder that solving the cold case was not an abstract goal, but a deeply human one, carrying consequences that would ripple outward long after the headlines faded. Within the community, speculation intensified, not loud enough to attract national attention, but pervasive enough to alter daily interactions. People weighed words more carefully, friendships felt tentative, and social spaces that had once been neutral took on an undercurrent of judgment. The idea that the truth might implicate someone known, someone trusted, had begun to feel less theoretical, and that shift unsettled the town more than the mystery ever had, because uncertainty can be compartmentalized, but betrayal cannot. Investigators tracked the evolution of stories over time, comparing early statements with later ones, identifying where details had changed subtly, where omissions appeared strategic rather than accidental. These shifts, when layered over new evidence, suggested a pattern of adjustment rather than decay, a sign that someone had been actively managing their version of events as the years passed. This insight reframed the cold case yet again, transforming it from a static failure into a dynamic process, one in which the truth had been shaped and reshaped in response to perceived threats. Despite this progress, doubt remained a constant companion, because cold cases teach humility as much as determination, reminding investigators that certainty is rare and mistakes are costly. They challenged each other's conclusions, invited external review, and resisted the temptation to rush toward closure, understanding that the pressure to resolve can be as dangerous as complacency. Every step forward was measured, every inference tested, the investigation advancing not in leaps, but in deliberate, almost cautious increments. As momentum continued to build, the case took on a weight that extended beyond the individuals involved, becoming a test of institutional memory and accountability. Decisions made in 1985 were reevaluated not with blame, but with clarity, recognizing how context, technology, and human limitation had shaped outcomes. This introspection mattered because it underscored a broader truth, that cold cases are not just about crimes left unsolved, but about systems strained by urgency, by expectation, by the imperfect nature of judgment under pressure. Late nights became routine, offices lit long after dark as detectives cross-referenced files, timelines stretching across walls, photographs pinned and repinned as relationships were reconsidered. In these quiet hours, the case felt closest to resolution, not because answers were guaranteed, but because the fog that had surrounded it for decades was thinning. Patterns once obscured now stood out with stark clarity, and with each pattern recognized, the sense of inevitability deepened. Yet beneath that inevitability lay a persistent unease, the awareness that revealing the truth would not be the end of the story, but the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape the town's understanding of itself. Cold cases, when solved, do not simply close, they echo, reverberating through communities that have built their identities around the absence of answers. Investigators understood this, and it tempered their determination with caution, their urgency with respect for the lives that would be altered by what came next. As the pieces continued to align, the question was no longer whether the cold case could be resolved, but how the resolution would land, whether it would arrive with clarity or controversy, with acceptance or resistance. The truth, long buried beneath layers of time and assumption, was pressing upward, and those closest to the investigation could feel it. A pressure building, insistent, unavoidable, signaling that the moment of confrontation was approaching, and that once it arrived, there would be no retreat back into uncertainty. By now, the cold case had reached a point where silence itself became evidence, where the absence of reaction spoke louder than words, and investigators felt the shift in the air, the subtle change that occurs when a long-dormant truth begins to assert its weight. Meetings grew shorter, more focused, because speculation had given way to preparation, and every conversation revolved around consequences rather than possibilities. The case was no longer asking what might have happened in 1985. It was demanding an answer to how the truth would be revealed, and to whom, because revelations, once released, cannot be contained. Detectives began to formalize their conclusions, not as declarations, but as carefully constructed narratives supported by timelines, behavior patterns, and corroborated evidence. Each element was scrutinized in isolation and then in combination, because cold cases rarely hinge on a single dramatic discovery. They resolve through accumulation, through the slow alignment of details that had once seemed unrelated. The story taking shape was unsettling not for its complexity, but for its simplicity, suggesting that the mystery had endured not because it was unfathomable, but because it had been misread. This realization forced a confrontation with the past that went beyond individual actions, implicating the broader dynamics of trust and familiarity that define small communities. In 1985, assumptions about who was capable of harm had guided the investigation as much as evidence, and now those assumptions were being dismantled piece by piece. Investigators understood that presenting their findings would challenge deeply held beliefs, not just about the case, but about the town itself, about the idea that everyone knew everyone, and that such closeness offered protection rather than opportunity. As preparations continued, attention turned to documentation, to ensuring that every claim could be traced back to verifiable sources, that every inference was anchored in observable behavior or physical evidence. Cold cases are vulnerable to narrative drift, to the temptation to fill gaps with intuition, and investigators resisted this at every turn, aware that credibility was as critical as truth. They anticipated skepticism, legal challenges, public doubt, and they built their case accordingly, layer by layer, redundancy reinforcing reliability. The emotional atmosphere within the team shifted as well, from frustration to resolve, because after years of uncertainty, clarity, even incomplete, offers a kind of relief. Yet that relief was tempered by responsibility, by the knowledge that their work would alter lives, reopen wounds, and possibly upend reputations that had endured unchallenged for decades. Investigators spoke quietly about the weight of this moment, acknowledging that solving the cold case was not an endpoint, but a transition, a movement from mystery to accountability. Outside the investigation, the town braced itself without knowing it, routines continuing under a surface tension that was impossible to ignore. People sensed that something was coming, not through official channels, but through tone, through the careful wording of public statements, through the presence of unfamiliar vehicles near familiar buildings. The cold case had become a shared anxiety, a collective anticipation that hovered over conversations and gatherings, shaping interactions in subtle ways. Media interest sharpened, no longer speculative, but investigative, reporters revisiting archives, reprinting photographs, contextualizing the disappearance within a broader national conversation about unresolved crimes and delayed justice. Headlines balanced caution with urgency, signaling that the story was evolving, and with each article, the town's sense of isolation diminished, replaced by the awareness that its private history was becoming public again. This exposure intensified emotions, because local memory, once contained, was now subject to external interpretation and judgment. Within this charged environment, investigators identified the final gaps that needed to be addressed, the points of vulnerability that could undermine their conclusions if left unexamined. They revisited those gaps relentlessly, not because they expected dramatic revelations, but because thoroughness itself is a form of defense in cold cases. Every unanswered question, no matter how small, represented an opportunity for doubt, and doubt, once introduced, can erode even the strongest case. The process of final review was exhaustive, often tedious but necessary, because decades-old investigations demand a level of rigor that matches the gravity of their consequences. Files were cross-checked, timelines synchronized, witness statements contextualized, and in doing so, the narrative solidified, not into a single unassailable truth, but into a framework robust enough to withstand challenge. Investigators reached a point of collective agreement, a consensus forged through debate and evidence, that the case had progressed as far as it could without formal action. This consensus marked a psychological turning point, because it meant acknowledging that the era of investigation was ending and the era of reckoning was beginning. The cold case, long an abstract symbol of mystery, was now a concrete sequence of actions, decisions, and consequences, and presenting it would force a reckoning not only with the past, but with the present identities of those involved. Investigators prepared for resistance, for disbelief, for anger, understanding that truth, when delayed, often arrives with force. As the moment approached, the weight of history pressed down on everyone involved, a reminder that time does not neutralize wrongdoing. It merely delays its consequences. The town, whether it realized it or not, stood on the threshold of transformation, because once the findings were made public, there would be no return to the comfortable ambiguity that had allowed life to continue without answers. The cold case was about to step out of the shadows, and when it did, it would demand attention, accountability, and a re-examination of everything the town thought it knew about itself and its past. The moment of disclosure did not arrive with sirens or sudden arrests. It came with controlled language and measured steps, because investigators understood that how the truth is introduced can shape how it is received, and in a case this old, perception mattered almost as much as proof. Briefings were scheduled, statements drafted and redrafted, every word weighed for precision, because the cold case had accumulated decades of speculation, and untangling that web required discipline. The aim was not to shock for its own sake, but to reveal, to replace rumor with evidence, and to do so in a way that could withstand the immediate surge of scrutiny. When information began to emerge, it moved faster than anyone anticipated, because the town had been waiting, even if it didn't know it, and the first confirmed details triggered a cascade of reaction. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, phones buzzed, and familiar names suddenly carried new weight, because the findings pointed not toward an abstract culprit, but toward actions rooted in the town's own history. The cold case was no longer a distant tragedy. It was a present confrontation, forcing people to reconcile what they thought they knew with what evidence now suggested. Investigators presented their work carefully, outlining timelines, behaviors, and forensic findings without embellishment, letting the accumulation of detail speak for itself. They emphasized process, not just outcome, showing how the case had evolved from 1985 to the present, how technology and perspective had changed what was possible, and why conclusions drawn now differed from those reached decades earlier. This transparency was intentional, a recognition that trust had to be rebuilt, not assumed, especially in a community that had lived with unanswered questions for so long. The reaction was immediate and complex, a mix of relief, disbelief, anger, and grief resurfacing all at once. Some residents felt vindicated, their long-held suspicions finally acknowledged, while others struggled to accept implications that disrupted their understanding of the past. The cold case had become a mirror, reflecting not just a crime, but the ways in which memory, loyalty, and fear had shaped collective behavior. In that reflection, the town saw both resilience and vulnerability, the strength to endure uncertainty, and the cost of avoiding uncomfortable truths. Media coverage intensified, shifting from speculation to analysis, national outlets contextualizing the case within a broader pattern of delayed justice, while local reporters focused on the human impact, the families, the streets, the routines now infused with new meaning. Headlines spoke of a cold case breakthrough, of new evidence, of a town forced to confront its past, and with each article, the story grew larger, extending beyond Ohio, reminding audiences that unresolved crimes are not anomalies, but symptoms of systems and circumstances that can fail anywhere. For the families most directly affected, the disclosure was both a release and a burden, because clarity does not erase loss, it reframes it, and decades of waiting had built expectations no revelation could fully satisfy. They listened as investigators spoke, measuring words against years of silence, searching for the moment when grief might finally align with understanding. Some found a measure of peace in the acknowledgement of truth, while others felt the weight of renewed anger, the realization that answers, once withheld, cannot undo time. Within the investigation, the focus shifted from discovery to defense, preparing for the inevitable challenges that accompany cold case breakthroughs. Every conclusion was stress-tested, every piece of evidence re-examined in anticipation of scrutiny, because the public nature of the findings invited not just interest, but opposition. Cold cases resolved after decades often face skepticism rooted in the passage of time itself, and investigators were acutely aware that their work would be judged not only on its accuracy, but on its resilience under pressure. The town's social fabric responded in subtle but profound ways. Conversations once avoided now unavoidable. Relationships strained by differing interpretations of the findings. Some people retreated, choosing silence over engagement, while others sought dialogue, eager to process what the cold case had revealed about their community. The disappearance, long a shared wound, was now a shared reckoning, demanding reflection on how fear and familiarity can coexist, how trust can obscure as much as it protects. As days passed, the initial shock settled into a deeper, more sustained tension, because the implications of the cold case extended beyond the immediate facts, raising questions about accountability, about how many other unanswered stories might be hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. The case became a reference point not just for what happened in 1985, but for how the town would approach truth moving forward, whether it would embrace transparency or retreat into defensive nostalgia. Investigators, having brought the case into the light, remained cautious, understanding that disclosure is not an endpoint, but a beginning, a shift from investigation to consequence. They monitored reactions, corrected misinformation, and maintained a steady presence, aware that uncertainty breeds distortion, and that clarity requires maintenance as much as discovery. The cold case, once frozen in time, was now in motion, reshaping narratives, challenging assumptions, and redefining what closure could mean after so many years. In the quiet moments that followed the initial wave of attention, the town began to absorb the weight of what had been revealed, the realization that the mystery it had lived with for decades was no longer undefined, but deeply human, rooted in choices and circumstances that could be understood, if not undone. The cold case had transformed from an absence into a story with contours and consequences, and as that transformation settled in, it left behind a lingering question, not about what had happened, but about how the community would carry this knowledge forward, into a future shaped by the truths it could no longer ignore. As the dust from the disclosure began to settle, a quieter, more unsettling phase took hold. The phase where answers exist but comfort does not. Where knowing what happened does not immediately translate into peace. The cold case had crossed a threshold, but crossing it revealed how narrow that passage truly was, because beyond revelation lay interpretation, consequence, and the slow, difficult work of integration. The town moved forward in appearance, routines resuming, shops opening, streets filling, yet beneath the surface, nothing felt the same, as if the ground itself had shifted, subtly but permanently. Investigators entered a period of sustained defense, responding to questions that grew more pointed with each passing day, challenges framed not just by curiosity, but by skepticism and fear of what the truth implied. Every claim was revisited publicly, dissected in forums and news segments, experts weighing in, critics questioning whether time had compromised accuracy. This scrutiny was expected, even welcomed, because cold cases resolved after decades must withstand doubt to earn legitimacy, and investigators met it with documentation, transparency, and a willingness to explain the uncomfortable realities of delayed justice. The families most closely connected to the case found themselves navigating a new landscape of emotion, one shaped not by uncertainty, but by clarity that arrived too late to change outcomes. Some spoke of relief, of finally having a narrative that made sense of years of absence, while others struggled with anger, directed not just at individuals, but at systems at moments when different decisions might have altered the course of events. The cold case had offered answers, but it had also illuminated the cost of waiting, the years spent in limbo that could never be reclaimed. Within the community, conversations deepened, moving beyond the facts of the case into reflections on responsibility and complicity. People examined their own roles, however indirect, questioning whether silence, assumptions, or deference to familiarity had contributed to the case's long dormancy. This introspection was uncomfortable because it suggested that the cold case was not solely the product of a single act, but of an environment that allowed uncertainty to harden into acceptance. The town grappled with this realization, balancing the need for accountability with the instinct for self-preservation. Media narratives evolved as well, shifting focus from the shock of discovery to the implications of resolution, exploring how communities process long-delayed truths and what justice means when time has altered everything it touches. The case became a point of reference in discussions about forensic advancements, investigative bias, and the ethical responsibilities of institutions when revisiting the past. In this broader context, the Ohio cold case was no longer just a local story. It was a case study, a reminder that unanswered questions rarely stay contained. As public attention expanded, so did the pressure on those implicated by the findings, whether directly or indirectly, and their responses varied, some defiant, others withdrawn, all shaped by the sudden collapse of narratives that had protected them for years. The cold case had disrupted not just memories, but identities, forcing people to confront how they had defined themselves in relation to the disappearance. This disruption was perhaps the most profound consequence, because it challenged the stability of personal histories constructed around uncertainty. Investigators, observing these reactions, were reminded that solving a cold case does not simply close a file. It opens a new chapter, one that requires sustained engagement and support. They worked to ensure that the findings were contextualized, that public understanding remained grounded in evidence rather than speculation, and that the story did not devolve into sensationalism. This balance was delicate, because the case's inherent drama invited exaggeration. Yet its true significance lay in its nuance, in the slow, methodical process that had brought the truth to light. The town's institutions responded in kind, schools, churches, and civic groups creating spaces for dialogue, acknowledging that collective processing was necessary to move forward. These efforts were tentative, sometimes awkward, but they reflected a recognition that the cold case had left an imprint too deep to ignore. Healing, if it was possible, would not come from forgetting, but from integrating the past into a shared understanding that could support growth rather than denial. As weeks turned into months, the intensity of attention waned, replaced by a more sustained, reflective engagement, because the story's initial shock had given way to a deeper awareness of its complexity. The cold case had revealed that closure is not a moment, but a process, one that unfolds unevenly, shaped by individual needs and collective dynamics. Some found solace in the clarity provided, others continued to wrestle with unresolved emotion, and both responses were valid, reflections of the case's profound impact. In quieter moments, the town began to redefine itself, not in opposition to its past, but in acknowledgement of it, recognizing that its identity had been shaped as much by unanswered questions as by the answers now available. The cold case, once a symbol of mystery and loss, had become a catalyst for reflection, prompting conversations about vigilance, empathy, and the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths before they calcify into silence. And yet, even as the community adjusted, a lingering unease remained, because some aspects of the case resisted neat resolution. Details that could be explained but not fully understood, motives that could be inferred but not entirely grasped. This residual ambiguity served as a reminder that truth, while powerful, is rarely complete, and that the past, once disturbed, continues to echo in ways that defy simple closure. The cold case had given the town answers, but it had also given it a responsibility to remember, to learn, and to remain attentive to the quiet spaces where questions still linger. Time moved forward again, but differently now, no longer weighed down by the absence of answers, instead burdened by their presence. Because truth, once revealed, does not dissolve into relief. It settles, heavy and enduring. The cold case had reshaped the town's relationship with its own history, transforming what had once been an abstract mystery into a concrete lesson about proximity, about how danger does not always arrive from the outside, but can grow quietly within familiar boundaries. This realization lingered in everyday moments, in glances exchanged at intersections, in pauses during conversations when the past surfaced uninvited. Institutions began to respond not out of obligation, but out of necessity, reassessing procedures, revisiting training, acknowledging that the failures of 1985 were not the result of indifference, but of limitation, and that recognizing those limitations was the first step toward preventing repetition. Law enforcement spoke openly about the evolution of investigative standards, about how bias, technology, and urgency intersect, and why cold cases demand humility as much as persistence. These discussions were not comfortable, but they were honest, and honesty, after decades of silence, felt like progress. For investigators who had lived with the case for years, the transition was personal, because solving a cold case does not simply conclude an assignment, it alters identity. They had carried the weight of unanswered questions, had measured their careers against an absence, and now they were adjusting to a reality where the mystery no longer defined their work. Some described a sense of quiet satisfaction, others a lingering restlessness, the awareness that resolution does not erase the emotional residue of decades spent chasing shadows. The families, too, continued their own journeys, navigating a space between validation and grief, because clarity can coexist with sorrow, and justice, when delayed, arrives with complex emotions attached. They spoke of moments when the weight lifted unexpectedly, when a simple explanation eased years of speculation, and of moments when anger resurfaced, sharpened by the knowledge that the truth had been reachable all along. The cold case had given them answers, but it had also given them a new relationship with time, one where the past and present felt permanently entwined. Within the town, subtle shifts in behavior signaled deeper change, an increased willingness to question assumptions, to notice anomalies, to engage rather than dismiss. The disappearance of 1985 had taught a generation the cost of complacency, and its resolution reinforced that lesson with clarity. Community members became more attentive to one another, not out of fear alone, but out of an understanding that vigilance and care are intertwined, that paying attention can be an act of protection rather than suspicion. Media narratives softened, moving away from shock toward reflection, emphasizing the human dimensions of delayed justice, the patience required to revisit the past responsibly. The cold case became a reference point in discussions about ethical reporting, about balancing public interest with respect for those affected, and in that evolution, the story gained depth, shedding sensationalism in favor of context. It was no longer just about what had happened, but about how the truth had been pursued and received. As official proceedings progressed, the town followed carefully, aware that accountability, once initiated, unfolds slowly, governed by processes that resist spectacle. Each development was noted, discussed, absorbed, not with the fevered intensity of the initial revelation, but with a measured seriousness that reflected the community's growth. The cold case had matured from a source of fear into a catalyst for responsibility, guiding how the town engaged with justice and memory. In private spaces, people continued to process, revisiting their own histories, reassessing moments once dismissed, and in doing so, they discovered that understanding is rarely singular, but layered, built through conversation and time. The disappearance had once fragmented the town's narrative, creating a void, and now that void was filled not with certainty alone, but with shared acknowledgement of complexity. This acknowledgement did not simplify the past, but it made living with it possible. As the years since 1985 were recontextualized, the cold case stood as a reminder that time does not neutralize responsibility, it merely delays confrontation. The town learned that waiting does not resolve uncertainty, that silence does not protect, and that truth, however delayed, carries an obligation to be faced fully. These lessons became part of the community's identity, shaping how it understood itself and its capacity for change. And yet, even as understanding deepened, a quiet vigilance remained, an awareness that resolution does not guarantee finality, that the echoes of the cold case would persist, informing choices and attitudes long after official actions concluded. The mystery had been addressed, but its influence endured, woven into the fabric of the town's consciousness, a reminder that justice, when pursued with patience and integrity, can emerge even after decades, and that its impact extends far beyond the moment it is revealed. In the end, What lingered was not the shock of revelation or the mechanics of justice, but the quiet transformation that followed, the way a town learned to live with truth after decades of uncertainty. The cold case, once a word spoken with frustration and resignation, became something else entirely, a marker of endurance, of the long arc between loss and understanding. People no longer spoke of 1985 as an open wound, but as a scar, visible, instructive, impossible to ignore, and in that visibility lay its meaning, because scars tell stories not just of harm, but of survival. The streets returned to their rhythms, seasons passing without the weight they once carried. Yet every now and then, memory surfaced unexpectedly, in a familiar corner, in a name overheard, in the way silence felt different now that it no longer concealed a question. The disappearance that had once defined fear now defined awareness, a reminder that safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of attention, of care, of willingness to confront what feels uncomfortable. The cold case had taught this lesson slowly, painfully, and once learned, it could not be unlearned. For those who had pursued the truth, the resolution brought a sense of closure that was neither celebratory nor complete, but grounded, rooted in the knowledge that persistence matters, that unanswered questions deserve patience rather than surrender. They understood that the work did not end with a conclusion, that vigilance is ongoing, and that the past, when acknowledged honestly, strengthens rather than weakens the present. The cold case had demanded years of attention, and in return it offered clarity not as a gift, but as a responsibility. Families carried forward with a new balance, grief no longer suspended by uncertainty, but integrated into memory, allowing space for both mourning and meaning. They spoke of the cold case not as an abstract failure, but as a journey, one that had tested endurance and revealed resilience they had not known they possessed. Answers had not erased pain, but they had given it shape, and shape made it bearable, made it something that could be shared rather than endured alone. The town itself emerged altered, quieter perhaps, but stronger in its awareness, more willing to question, to listen, to notice. The disappearance of 1985 became part of its collective memory, not as a cautionary tale frozen in fear, but as a reminder of accountability and connection. People understood now that truth does not arrive on its own, that it requires effort, courage, and the patience to revisit what has been set aside. The cold case had proven that even long-buried questions can be answered, if the will to ask them remains. In moments of reflection, the community recognized that closure is not a door that shuts, but a window that opens, offering perspective rather than erasure. The cold case had opened such a window, allowing light into spaces long defined by shadow, and while that light revealed imperfections, it also illuminated paths forward. The past no longer hovered as an unresolved threat, but stood as a reference point, guiding decisions with its hard-earned lessons. As years continued to pass, the story settled into history, taught not with sensationalism, but with nuance, emphasizing the human elements that defined it, the choices, the oversights, the persistence that ultimately brought clarity. The cold case became an example of why memory matters, why attention must be sustained, and why justice, though delayed, is still justice when pursued with integrity. Its legacy was not fear, but vigilance, not suspicion, but awareness. And so the voice that had carried this story from silence to understanding finally softened, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement, because some stories do not end with resolution alone, they end with responsibility. The cold case of Ohio 1985 left behind no mystery, but a message that truth waits, that time does not erase obligation, and that communities, like individuals, are defined not by the absence of darkness, but by how they respond when it is brought into the light. Even after everything had been said, after files were closed and statements archived, the cold case refused to disappear completely, because some stories do not end when the facts are known, they end when their echo finally fades, and this one still reverberated through Ohio in quiet, persistent ways. It lived on in the pauses between conversations, in the way people listened more closely now, in how ordinary details carried extra weight, as if the town had learned that meaning often hides in what seems insignificant. The cold case had altered perception itself, teaching a community to read between the lines of daily life. There were nights when the streets looked the same as they had in 1985, the same pools of light under street lamps, the same shadows stretching across pavement, and in those moments memory pressed close not as fear but as awareness. People remembered how easily normalcy had masked something darker, and that memory sharpened their sense of responsibility, not just to protect themselves, but to remain attentive to one another. The cold case had revealed that distance is not measured in miles, but in attention, and that neglect can exist even in close-knit places. Institutions carried the lesson forward quietly, policies refined, training updated, not in response to public pressure, but to internal recognition that improvement is a form of respect for the past. The investigation of the cold case became part of professional memory, referenced not as a failure, but as an evolution, a demonstration of how persistence and humility can coexist. It reminded those who followed that certainty is rare, that doubt must be managed rather than denied, and that revisiting old conclusions is not weakness, but responsibility. For the families, life continued in small, deliberate steps, grief now woven into routine rather than suspended in question. They spoke less to the media, choosing privacy over explanation, yet their presence remained a quiet testament to endurance. The cold case had shaped their identities in ways no resolution could undo, but it had also freed them from the tyranny of not knowing, and that freedom, however incomplete, allowed space for breath, for memory that was no longer haunted by speculation. Within the town, new generations grew up knowing the story not as a rumor, but as a lesson, taught carefully, without sensationalism, emphasizing empathy over fear. Teachers, parents, and community leaders framed the cold case as a reminder of vigilance and compassion, of the importance of asking questions without rushing to judgment. In doing so, they transformed a tragedy into a tool for awareness, ensuring that the past informed the future without defining it entirely. Occasionally, someone would still ask why it took so long, why the truth had remained buried beneath years of routine and assumption, and the answer was never simple because cold cases are not held in place by a single failure, but by layers of human limitation. Time, fear, bias, and context all play their roles, and understanding that complexity became part of the town's maturity. The cold case was no longer a source of shame, but a catalyst for understanding how easily certainty can deceive. As the story receded further into history, its presence became quieter, but more stable, no longer demanding attention, but offering perspective. The cold case had become a reference point, a reminder that silence is not neutrality, that unanswered questions exert pressure even when ignored, and that confronting them, however late, is an act of collective courage. The town carried this knowledge forward, not loudly, but deliberately. And so, long after headlines faded and interest shifted elsewhere, the cold case remained, not as an open wound or a sensational memory, but as a settled truth, integrated into the identity of a place that had learned, painfully and patiently, that justice is not only about outcomes, but about the willingness to look back, to listen carefully, and to accept responsibility for what is revealed. The story no longer needed to be told urgently, because its lesson had already taken root, living quietly in the way people noticed, questioned, and cared, ensuring that what happened in 1985 would never again be reduced to silence. Time kept moving, as it always does, but the cold case moved with it, changing shape rather than disappearing, slipping from urgency into permanence, from a question demanding answers into a presence that simply refused to leave. It lingered in archive boxes and aging evidence lockers, in digital files backed up and re-backed up, in notes written by hands that had long since retired or passed on. The case no longer screamed for attention, yet it continued to breathe, quietly, steadily, as if waiting for something it could not name. Every few years, something small would disturb the surface. A new detective, leafing through old records late at night. A journalist stumbling across a detail that felt wrong. A witness remembering a sound, a face, a moment that had once seemed irrelevant. Each time, the town would hold its breath, just briefly, wondering if this would be the moment when the cold case finally crossed the invisible line from history into closure. Each time, the moment passed, leaving behind the same uneasy stillness. What made the cold case endure was not just the absence of a final answer, but the clarity of what had been lost. A life interrupted, a timeline shattered, a community forced to grow up faster than it expected. These were not abstract ideas. They were specific, rooted in places people still walked past every day. The road where headlights once slowed. The building that had changed owners but not atmosphere. The stretch of time that still felt heavier than the years around it. Investigators spoke of the case with a different tone now, stripped of optimism but not of care. They understood its limits, the way evidence degrades and memories fracture, yet they also understood its value. The cold case was a teacher. It taught patience. It taught restraint. It taught the danger of assuming that silence means resolution. In briefings and training sessions, it appeared not as a failure, but as a reminder that some truths resist force and yield only to persistence. For the families, anniversaries still arrived with quiet precision. No cameras, no statements, just the internal reckoning of another year survived without definitive answers. They had learned to live alongside uncertainty, to coexist with a question mark that never quite faded. The cold case no longer defined every day, but it marked the calendar, an invisible line separating before from after, shaping memory in subtle, unrelenting ways. In the wider community, the story continued to circulate, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, passed down in careful retellings that avoided embellishment. People spoke of it with respect, aware now of how easily speculation can wound, how quickly rumor can replace truth. The cold case had taught restraint, had taught people to wait, to listen, to accept that not every story bends to narrative satisfaction. And yet, beneath that acceptance, something remained unresolved, a faint tension that never fully released. Because cold cases are not just about what happened, they are about what might still be discovered. They exist in a state of permanent potential, balanced between dormancy and revelation. As long as one detail remains unexplained, one timeline incomplete, the story stays alive, not as entertainment, but as obligation. Late at night, when the town grew quiet and the past felt closer than usual, it was easy to imagine that the cold case was still listening, still present, still waiting for the smallest shift in perspective to unlock what time had concealed. Not a dramatic confession, not a sudden arrest, just a moment of clarity, arriving without warning, altering everything in a single breath. Until that moment comes, the cold case endures, woven into the fabric of Ohio's collective memory, no longer demanding answers, yet never relinquishing the right to ask its question. It stands as proof that some stories do not end cleanly, that justice is sometimes a horizon rather than a destination, and that the most unsettling mysteries are not those filled with noise, but those that persist in silence, patient, watchful, and unfinished. Years folded in on themselves, quietly, almost imperceptibly, and the cold case settled into a strange dual existence, both dormant and awake, archived yet alert, like a nerve that never quite healed. It no longer dominated conversations, yet it surfaced in unexpected moments, triggered by nothing more than a familiar street corner, an old photograph, a name spoken too casually. The town had learned to live with it, but living with something is not the same as forgetting it. The evidence remained, preserved with care that bordered on reverence. Envelopes sealed decades earlier, labels faded but still legible. Objects once handled with gloves now resting behind layers of protocol and time. Each item carried a silent accusation, not toward any single person, but toward the years themselves, asking what had been missed, what had been misunderstood, what truth had slipped through the cracks while everyone believed the answers were already known. The cold case sat at the center of this quiet inventory, unchanged, yet constantly reevaluated. Technology continued to advance, offering possibilities that once belonged to science fiction. Old tapes were enhanced, images sharpened, data was reprocessed with tools unimaginable in 1985. And yet, progress did not guarantee resolution. Each new method illuminated fragments, never the whole. The cold case resisted completion, reminding investigators that technology can amplify truth, but it cannot invent it. The missing pieces were still human, still buried in memory, still locked behind silence. From time to time, a tip would arrive, hesitant, cautious, often anonymous. Someone remembering a detail they had ignored. someone reinterpreting a past decision, someone finally willing to speak after years of fear or guilt. Each tip reignited a familiar tension, hope restrained by experience. The cold case had taught everyone the cost of expectation, the danger of believing that this time would be different. Still, every lead was followed, not because certainty was expected, but because neglect was no longer acceptable. The town itself had changed. New buildings rose where old ones had fallen. Businesses opened and closed. Faces turned over with each generation. Yet the emotional geography remained oddly consistent. Certain places carried more weight. Certain absences felt louder. The cold case had etched itself into the landscape, shaping how people understood safety, trust, and responsibility. It had become part of the town's subconscious, influencing decisions without announcing itself. Those closest to the case aged alongside it. Detectives retired. Journalists moved on. Family members grew older, their memories sharper in some places, softer in others. Time did not erase their connection. It refined it. The cold case no longer felt like an emergency, but like a vow, an unspoken promise that even if resolution never came, effort would never stop. The story was no longer driven by urgency, but by principle. What remained most unsettling was not the absence of a final answer, but the awareness of proximity. The truth, whatever it was, had once existed within arm's reach. Someone had known it. Someone had carried it silently through decades of ordinary life. That knowledge lingered like static, impossible to trace, impossible to dismiss. The cold case was not distant history. It was a reminder of how close the unimaginable can be. And so the story continued, not with sirens or headlines, but with patience. The cold case waited, suspended between past and future, refusing to resolve itself, yet refusing to fade. It existed as a question without expiration, a quiet pressure beneath the surface of daily life, insisting that some truths are not meant to be rushed, only pursued, steadily, relentlessly, until time itself runs out of places to hide. By the time the cold case reached the stage of its life, it no longer felt like an investigation unfolding in real time, but like a presence that had learned how to endure, adapting to silence the way living things adapt to darkness. It no longer waited for a single breakthrough. It waited for alignment, for the rare moment when memory, motive, and opportunity would briefly overlap. Until then, it existed in fragments, each one complete on its own, yet insufficient to close the distance between suspicion and certainty. There were people who still carried the weight of it without ever speaking its name. They felt it in hesitation, in the instinct to double-check, in the quiet discomfort that arose when the past brushed too close to the present. Some had been children in 1985, old enough to remember the fear but too young to understand it. Now grown, they recognized the cold case as the moment when innocence fractured, when the idea of safety became conditional. That realization followed them, subtle but persistent, shaping the way they raised their own children, the way they watched their streets at night. The case files told one story, but the town told another, less precise, more human. It was told in lowered voices, in pauses that lingered too long, in the careful avoidance of certain conclusions. People had learned that certainty can be dangerous, that once a narrative settles, it resists correction. The cold case had taught restraint not through instruction, but through consequence, and that lesson remained deeply ingrained. Investigators still returned to it during quiet hours, when active cases slept and the office lights dimmed. Not out of obligation, but out of a sense of unfinished conversation. They traced timelines, not expecting revelation, but seeking coherence, trying to understand how events had unfolded without resolution. The cold case did not reward persistence with clarity, but it did reward it with perspective, offering insight into how easily truth can fragment when pressure, fear, and time converge. What haunted the story most was its ordinariness. There was no single moment that screamed inevitability, no clear warning that tragedy was about to strike. Everything had looked normal until it wasn't, and that normalcy became the most unsettling detail of all. The cold case stood as evidence that disruption does not always announce itself, that catastrophe often enters quietly, disguised as routine, unnoticed until it is too late to intervene. As years continued to pass, the question shifted from what had happened to whether the truth would ever surface at all. Not because it was gone, but because it might be locked inside someone who no longer remembered its significance, or who had convinced themselves that silence was safer than revelation. The cold case pressed against that silence, testing it, waiting for fatigue, for doubt, for the moment when holding on to the secret became heavier than releasing it. And so the story persisted, suspended in a state that defied closure. Not resolved, not abandoned, but held in careful balance by those who understood that some mysteries resist conclusion not because they are unsolvable, but because they demand patience beyond a single lifetime. The cold case remained, not as a headline or a scandal, but as a quiet reminder that time does not erase truth, it only hides it, and that what is hidden long enough begins to shape everything around it, unseen but undeniably present. At a certain point, the cold case stopped being measured in years and started being measured in absences, in the empty spaces where answers should have settled but never did. It lived in the gaps between official statements and personal recollections, in the thin air where facts dissolved into interpretation. What remained was not confusion, but tension, a low, constant pressure that never quite released, no matter how much time passed. The town learned to recognize that pressure instinctively. It surfaced during renovations, when old foundations were exposed and someone would pause, suddenly aware that the ground beneath them held more than concrete and wiring. It appeared during reunions, when familiar faces gathered and someone noticed who was missing, not just physically, but historically, erased from the continuity of shared memory. The cold case had carved out those absences, leaving behind impressions that refused to smooth over. Law enforcement no longer spoke of resolution in absolute terms. The language had softened, become more careful, more precise. They spoke of probability, of scenarios, of likelihoods supported by evidence that could no longer be tested in the ways it once could. The cold case had forced a recalibration of expectations, replacing the promise of certainty with the discipline of honesty. It was no longer about winning against the past, but about understanding it without distortion. For those who had lived closest to the story, the emotional weight shifted over time. Anger dulled. Shock faded. What replaced them was something quieter and more complex, a layered awareness that blended grief with endurance. The cold case was no longer an open wound, but it was not a scar either. It was something in between, a reminder that healing does not always mean closure, and that survival sometimes means carrying unanswered questions without letting them define every breath. The possibility that the truth might never fully surface became less frightening than it once had been. Not because it was acceptable, but because it was familiar. The unknown had become a companion, unwelcome but predictable. The cold case no longer demanded emotional energy every day, yet it shaped behavior